Welcome everyone to another exclusive interview that I have the privilege to have with one of the co-authors of recently launched book Courage. The book has been launched to celebrate and to promote mental health. The book is written by 25 authors. They share their stories and how they overcame mental difficulties that life is bringing sometimes with its challenges and struggles. I'm very excited to welcome to our channel Shobana Narasimhan. Shobana, thank you very much for being with me today and giving me this opportunity to meet you, to discuss with you about life, your story that you have shared in book Courage. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
You have shared in the book, and I would like to just start with it because for me it's very intriguing subject, anxiety. Today, you are a professional from software industry. It's very difficult industry. At the same time, you are supporting people with your expertise within the positive psychology. So for me, these are complete extreme areas. When you have mentioned anxiety, how do you perceive that experience? Because for me, I know fear. I know facing problems, but I never actually in my life use, oh, I have the anxiety. What does it mean?
For me, being anxious was mostly tied to my shyness. I was an extremely shy child. I grew into a shy adult. Often in social situations, I was the quietest person in the room. And that really affected the way I showed up, both in social situations and in the workplace. I tended to minimize myself, the space I took up, my voice. And that's mostly how I perceived it and how it affected me.
How today you are perceiving yourself going through that journey? I assume it was quite difficult. And you have been on a stage, again, industry that is dominated by men, tech industry. How did you create the journey for yourself to be there on that scene with anxiety, with that feelings, with the shyness, as you say?
Yeah, well, the start of the story was grounded really in practicalities. I was the first generation immigrant to the US. I was, barely even 17 when I came for college. And I needed to, support myself when I graduated. And so really I chose the practical path because computer science at the time was very much in demand. So
Mm-hmm.
I think the journey started there with that. And it wasn't easy, I'm not gonna lie. Because as you said, it is a male-dominated industry. I was very shy, very introverted as well. I live a lot in my own head.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think over time, and we can talk about this a little bit later, I moved a little bit away from the core hardcore tech and into the operational side of things, which really
Mm-hmm.
played to my strengths. And that's when I found my voice.
As an introvert, you moved into operational area. This is where there is a necessity to collaborate, to interact with other people. How did you overcome that? Because it's not easy for the introvert just to be in the middle of operations and manage that.
Yeah, it's a great question, but surprisingly, being very introverted was actually one of my biggest strengths in that situation because introverts tend to be very good listeners, and nothing fosters collaboration and trust better than when the other side feels like they are being heard. Um, and it took me a while to realize this because for many years I thought of like introversion just as a weakness that I had to get around.
Mm.
But then I slowly realized it was my strength. I could forge great relationships and build trust just through the art of being a good listener.
We hear about that quite a lot, that being introvert, it's not a weakness. Though for so many years we grew up with this mindset, being introvert, it is a weakness. And we were focusing more on extroverts because they are everywhere in the room. They are very interactive and charming, charismatic quite often. Studies show that at the end, extroverts are having limitations in focusing. What you actually just confirmed, that that's the beauty, and this is what we need, especially at the workplace, to be heard, to have the attention on us.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you follow the practical pathway and you choose the IT, and I understand there will be also some kind of element of engineering. So very different way of mind operating. And I like the part of practicality because as young people, we are having the tendency to follow the trends rather than sit back and see. It will be hard, but that's the pragmatic way I should take because this is where I get strength. How did you place yourself among young people when you went to high schools and, girls are doing girlish things and suddenly you switch and go other direction?
I would say for me that was not so much of a factor because I am from an Indian family, and
Mm.
you are actually encouraged to go into the sciences regardless of gender. That's a cultural thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't want to pick up on something you said though it's not directly related to the question. Is following the practical path and landing. There's a quote that came to mind: "You bloom where you're planted," right? And even though I didn't grow up thinking this is what I wanted to do, I landed there for practical reasons, and I found my passion. So I found I had a knack and a passion for doing this collaborative operational work. And that's something I tell my kids also. They're teenagers, 19 and 17. You don't always know what you want to do at this age. In fact, very few people do. Follow a path, get good at it, and you find your passion. So I'm sorry that was a little bit of a tangent, but it did come to mind when you said, well, you landed where you did for practical reasons. Yeah.
I really love it, and thank you very much for bringing that because it's so important for many people, especially today. Even you say you are discussing these things with your kids, and this is what I say to my son right now. He's 16. You will follow your passion later. Now just go. It sounds harsh because we are taught follow your passion, but there's so many people right now, they follow the passion and they have no job because there are so unpractical studies, but then there is no perspectives for that particular work. Or people even are having no inspiration or idea how to utilize that degree. A bit squared with their mind in terms of I finished that university, that degree, so I need to find a job in that particular area. I don't go anywhere else. And then, oh, I can't find a job for the last 5 years. And I said this to my son, go into the direction that once you get degree, next day you get a job. And then you will see where you go.
Yeah. Yes. I think that's great advice. It's exactly what I tell my kids also.
The passion, as you say, passion comes later. And even in more mature shape, I think. How is it to educate yourself for the professional growth versus personal development? You choose difficult path in terms of your education. You were having some factors like being introverted, being shy, having anxiety. So we can consider them as obstacles. How did you align these two roads, actually?
I'd say they were very much intertwined, because working on my personal development intentionally, which I didn't start doing until, at least 10 to 15 years in my career, did enable me um, to be bolder and to take opportunities I might not have taken before. But I would say it also goes the other way, that the more competent I got at something, I didn't have to work on being like outspoken or passionate about it. It just came. There are people out there who will project the confidence without knowing something inside out. I was not one of those. I really had to be very competent at what I did. And then effortlessly, the confidence and the passion would often flow. So I'd say it worked both ways, but the personal development was harder. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I did have to keep up with like technologies or, the latest trends and whatever I was doing, but that wasn't hard for me. The hard thing was really stretching myself with the personal development, but that's what sometimes unlocked the um, greater career opportunities.
You say that you pick up your personal development intentionally. How did you even notice that there is an area that you shall focus for its development?
I think my first 10 years, right, were just finding my way. I mean, for years, I just thought I wasn't as smart as people around me because I couldn't like speak on the fly. I wouldn't talk in meetings. So I thought, well, I'm just not as quick as them.
Mm-hmm.
But I started then just reading up more about the Myers-Briggs types, for instance, and the self-awareness grew that it wasn't like I was slower than everyone else. It was just that I needed more time to process. And sometimes my best ideas would come after the meeting, and that wasn't good or bad. It's just how I was wired. So revelations like those were a little bit of aha moments. And and as I started getting them, that's when I realized a lot of it is about how you're wired. And the world is made up of many different types, but the corporate ideal is really structured around, certain personality types, like the extroversion or, or the confidence or being able to speak up like on the fly. Um,
In your chapter, you were mentioning about not being heard, that you are attending the meeting and you say ABC, no one is hearing you, and in the moment, other person is saying the same, exactly what you said, and everybody are clapping and noticing that person. Was it one of these moments when you realize also, okay, that's the area I need to strengthen it up?
yeah, it was a few of those moments where I'd be sitting there with a lot of ideas in my head, 80% of which didn't come out really. It would stay like locked in like this vault that, I'd made for myself. But even when it did, I wouldn't say it very assertively or confidently. And the meeting would just move on like I hadn't spoken. And 10 minutes later, someone else who probably didn't know as much would say the same thing. And people would say, and I don't think it was intentional. I think it was
Mm-hmm.
just the way we each projected ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's experiences like that slowly evolved into thinking that I shouldn't have to always adapt myself to fit the system. And it grew into a very ardent belief. Rather than questioning yourself, question the systems. And in this case, the systems around me were not friendly to people like me who are maybe much better at writing or at one-on-one conversations. It was very much geared towards someone who could just kind of speak up in a large meeting and make themselves heard. And of course, I couldn't single-handedly fix that, but that's when I slowly started just asserting myself in my own way. I could write out my arguments. I would write, I would send it out, have more one-on-one meetings. Um, I, I think I talk about this in my book as well. So I guess it was a mix of maybe changing myself, but also adapting the system.
You have built your profession, you have built your expertise in Silicon Valley. That's a monster, industrial monster. And you say about being aware you need to gain boldness in you. How to become bold?
I think you have to come up with a definition of boldness that lands with you. I mean, the Valley, to be fair, has a mix of people. I've worked with really nice people and challenging people, but through it all, I decided that when I looked in the mirror every day, I wanted to like the person that I saw.
Mm.
And that's where I didn't want to give up on some of the kindness or the empathy that we're going to talk about, even though it sometimes got me labeled as, oh, too nice or too soft or, too something. But I think I had my inner compass that said, this is who I am, and I'm not going to compromise on this. I remember once going to it was an offsite with other engineering leaders, and many of them said, "Well, I was very shy. I was a total introvert, but I got out of that, and now I'm like this super, confident, et cetera, et
Mhm.
cetera." And that's great, but I also felt it was a little bit sad that they had to mask so much, right? Where I really never, I didn't mask much. How I was at work was how I was at home. Um,
Mhm.
so I think to answer your question, come up with a definition of bold that doesn't compromise who you are. And I think that was fundamentally my guide. And what I looked at rather than how do I become bold is how do I get the work done? And I could get the work done being who I was. I don't know if that makes sense or answers your question.
Absolutely. You represent with yourself the integrity between who you are in your personal life, the values. Do not behave upon the various situations and compromise on the values that should be your original, honest, authentic label, who you really are. I also like what you have said to understand the definition of boldness and design it upon your being. Because what I notice, a lot of people, we are following certain theories and we follow them exactly as they are without using the process of thinking. The author of that theory could have completely different idea, so brought that idea into the framework, but it doesn't mean we should follow and fit in square, as you also said. I don't have to fit always into the system, but find your own way, that it will be adding the value to who you are.
Yes, absolutely. I love the word you used, integrity, because that has also been part of my compass. And I think if workplaces focused more on the outcomes someone produced rather than how they got there and, the performativeness, it would lead to a happier and more authentic workplace.
Correct. When people are gaining some power. And that's very also interesting that with the power, we still have these kind of images associated, be rough and tough, be not kind. Only then you will have the respect in the room. And it's sad because we are talking since like 30, 40 years, especially within the leadership, that kindness and attention towards people are the principles of good, effective leadership. Yet we are performing this roughness and unkindness. How did you survive with your kind attitude, your kind nature in this rough environment?
I think again, it was for me just taking a very nuanced view of niceness and kindness, because I did get that label, oh, too nice. And it took me some time to just feel very comfortable with nice just being these fundamental human qualities, of, kindness and empathy and reason and respect, all of which get clubbed as too nice. And as to how I survived, I think those are the qualities. You're working with other human beings, and human beings will respond to those qualities. It will bring out the best in them. So I don't think the challenge was being any of those things, because the people, my peers, or, say the engineers I was managing responded positively. It was the labels that would get put on me from other senior leaders when they saw my style.
Very similar experience. And I remember years ago, I heard, Magdalena, you will not make it because you smile too much.
Oh, yeah.
And then I realized when you sit with the big guys at the table, they don't smile because it's this mask. If you don't smile, you give impression you are a serious person. But then when you look at their performance track or end, for me, the kindness, the smile, it's just another level of authenticity.
Yeah. And I also feel that those leaders, by not bringing out the best in people, even putting on their pure business hat, it's quite tragic, to use a dramatic word, how much potential is wasted because people can't fully express themselves. I have been under senior leadership who used fear as a motivator, right? And it strikes me now that putting in the hours that we did, I had two young children. I was, stretching both ends of the day, because we had a global workplace.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought at the time that I needed to toughen up. But then, with the perspective of time, I was very tough to be doing all of that. So it wasn't me that needed to change. That was the first point. And the second point was that a lot of my potential was being wasted because of the fear, because I was just scared, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think I deserve better than to feel scared.
Yeah.
And I wasn't fully expressing myself. So, and assuming there were other people that way, in the organization was wasting a lot of talent. So even if you say, okay, I'm not into like all these feelings and things, I'm looking at it from a business perspective, it's just bad business to have a fear-driven culture.
You had your bosses and you were managing teams with all these soft qualities that, let's name it, that make us human, not the robots. How or what kind of behaviors you would advise to start practicing to develop that strength in you, to be able to express yourself, to be able to reduce the fear to say, to stand up for yourself? Because we know there are so many women who are afraid of losing job, and they go, as the boss will say, they work hard and they are treated unfairly. How they eventually, without further damage or losing the job, how they can start a journey of developing these kind of strengths in them?
I'm gonna maybe divide this into two parts. I think the first element of it is um, just articulating to yourself what assertiveness means. And I think women especially are afraid of being perceived as aggressive. Um, but I have a quote in the chapter that I actually read only a few months ago, but I really wish my younger self had said it over and over. And if you don't mind, I am gonna just read it out
Yeah,
and
go ahead.
into this. It's in a book called Changing for Good. And the quote is, if non-assertive passive behavior says, you count, but I don't. Aggressive behavior says, I count and you don't. Assertiveness respectfully communicates that I count just as you do. And I love this definition because it's respecting the other person, but it's also respecting yourself. So I think if that lesson could be taught to like little girls everywhere, we'd have an easier time of it as because I do know I've had so many young women kind of back channel me. Did I just come across as too aggressive in that meeting as I grew? And I'd always have to assure them, no, you were just, you made your point and you made it respectfully. So that's the inner work, right? In again defining assertiveness in a way that's comfortable for you. And I think the definition that I'd read out would be comfortable for most people. But the second also is what I alluded to earlier. Figure out your unique communication style. It's not always about being able to stand up and be the loudest voice in the room. It could be you're an amazing writer, or it could be when you're one-on-one, it comes out. It could be any number of things. And really harness that communication. Um, so it's two things. First, and we've alluded to both of those. First, working on yourself to be assertive and defining assertiveness in a way that lands for you. And the second is figuring out how best you communicate and really embracing that.
I like the assertiveness part. And as professional world appears as a second dimension in our world, in our life, the first one is our personal life. And if we want to really success with this right value we want to receive from people, the respect, it's very important for us, especially as a woman, that we will learn to respect ourselves on this personal layer of life. Because if we don't do that, and this is where also often we are not failing, I don't want to say failing, but we are following not necessarily strong criterias, factors, where our assertiveness is broken not for our benefit, and we are losing ourselves. So from already that weak position, we will enter the professional world with, let's call it, I am not enough.
Yeah.
And we will keep continuing allowing people to see us from through that lens. I am not enough.
Yes. Yes. I think a lot of my um personal growth has been around just convincing myself that I belong. If I get a seat at the table, I earned it, and claiming my space, and finding my voice. Um, but I would also challenge this in some ways, in that much of the advice women is given is around editing themselves. In fact, I read a Harvard Business Review article some weeks ago that really resonated with me, where women are always told to apologize less, for instance, and stop saying, I'm sorry, I'm stop saying. I said, why? Wouldn't the world be in a better place if men apologize more? And the article split it along gender lines, but it doesn't have to be gender lines. I usually tend to think in terms of personality types, right? But it's very true that the advice that women are given is like this, and project confidence, where the advice might be, hey, apologizing isn't a bad thing. It makes for, again, a kinder workplace. It's not a bad thing to work hard and be competent before you project confidence, really.
Yeah.
I again think, better quality work would be produced, and it's more egalitarian. So I now tend to, there's a balance between doing the self-work to, you know, to kind of belong, to claim your space and just lead with confidence,
Mhm.
between following all of the advice that is really editing women, where maybe it's the men who should be edited. Um, uh, and the example that article gave is a small one, but it's a good one. We're always told to say, not say I'm sorry too much. Where, why? Why should it not be the other side who's told to say sorry more, right?
Years ago, I have noticed at my side, I used to say sorry. And when I realized it was just like, I don't know, waking up momentum, that even when you are writing, you're like, oh, I'm sorry. Uh, did I make you busy? Oh, I'm sorry. Why I'm writing, I'm sorry. What I'm
Yeah,
sorry for.
yeah,
And then you're you're right. It doesn't matter what country. Girls are actually raised in that way. Be kind. Tell the neighbor good morning. Say thank you for the lollipop. Say this bend and, be kind. Uh, say that you like that gift. Always in that positive, like we are taught to wear mask and be
yeah.
grateful for whatever we are getting, for whatever behavior, for whatever quality of attention we are having. We should be grateful for. And and then we become adults. Boss says, stay after hours. Yes, sir. You need to do this extra work. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to break that pattern when for years we develop that in our brain. How do you
Yeah.
perceive it from from the positive psychology? Because right now you work around this area. How eventually we can break that pattern? How positive psychology helps with that?
Yeah, it's very interesting you mentioned that, because as you were talking about how little girls are brought up right, I was thinking of a concept I just learned about. It's called the golden mean, and it's about how each of our character strengths, we can we could fall into a pattern of underusing or overusing those strengths. So kindness may be one of your strengths, but overused, it could go many different directions, which is
Mhm.
putting your own needs last, or sometimes even being intrusive. And kindness underused, well, it's fairly obvious what kind of underused would look like, right?
Yes.
The lack of empathy. But then there's an ideal expression of each character strength. And I think that's what we should be heading towards when we're raising our children. is is not if you praise every time a little girl does obeys you, for instance. You keep reinforcing that's what you get rewarded for. That's what you get rewarded for. And it will fall into them maybe overusing that. So I think it's a tricky balance we as a society have to strike that as we are bringing up the next generation to teach them like the optimal expression of each strength. I'd go around there. And we're not there. It just the trip that I went on this weekend, this is exactly what we're talking about, where the little girls would be like, serving the adults tea, where the little boys would be off to the side and they'd be getting like praise for that. What a good little girl. And we do that still with this generation of very educated professional women. So we have a ways to go, but from a positive psychology lens, I would say it's to really understand the nuance between an underuse, the overuse, and the golden mean of each strength.
Have you observed these kind of also things? We grow up, we are receiving our degrees, then we start our journeys, professional journeys, and actually no one is directing us to create a knowledge around self-awareness. We are having a lot of people, professionals, go through your trauma, heal your inner child, and so on. Why we don't hear it when we are reaching 20 years old? Hey, hold on. You are about to enter adulthood. Can you do the inventory of your childhood now when you are still fresh-minded? And I don't know, do a 10-question checklist so that you will identify eventually for certain areas to focus at the early stage of your adulthood for improvement.
Yes.
Why it is not happening?
Yes, I absolutely think that this kind of self-awareness should begin early. As said, for me, it was very just accidental. I just stumbled into things from self-discovery. Um, as to why it's not happening, I think it's just understanding that this kind of awareness is as important, even in your professional development,
Yes.
as the hard skills are. I mean, I'd love if even my engineering major son could be launched into the world with the hard skills of engineering,
Mm-hmm.
but with also the awareness that we've been talking about, inventorying your strengths and your values. Because honestly, skills can be picked up easily, but this grounding is needs to be set intentionally, not by trial and error as it was for me, because that's what's going to let you grow.
I read the book years ago from Shauna Shapiro, Rewire Your Mind. And she's writing, I love that framework. And it became somehow fundamental, like a mantra for me. She's using just 3 pillars: intention, attention, and attitude. And it can be, stretched in all directions, in every discipline you want to talk about. And from the human standing position, it's all what you need to be aware. What's your intention? Draw wherever you want. What is the level of your attention towards it? And what kind of attitude will apply to it? And like you say, every skill can be picked up. This is for me quite interesting just right now when we are having different leaders with different level of effectiveness, right? Or I don't know, healthy or unhealthy intention. If we are not having well developed the soft skills within our personal life, can we actually, the hard skills within the leadership, utilize them properly?
Yeah, I mean, I love that framework. I'm gonna have to go do some reading on it. And you bring up a great point, that often people reach the senior levels of leadership with very well-developed hard skills, but without this, inner compass and grounding. And at that level, it's not about the hard skills, really, right? It's more about sort of the intentionality and, and dare I say it, the people focus, as well as knowing yourself. So, so maybe if the schools aren't teaching it, we should. I try to do
We
it with my
should,
kids.
right?
So
I think
yeah,
it should be really, really
yeah,
highlighted that
yeah,
the young people should be taught and yeah, to grow with this awareness, that self-awareness is really, really important because it took me years to understand where my past decisions are coming from. But the bill is already issued, right? Decision has been made. We will have some lucky house where we will get a healthy attention within the house, where the right inspiration will be given. But many of us are lacking of this. When we have these missing elements, we will be driven, I call it toxic needs, and based on them, we are making decisions that can be really good experience if we look at the things positive with a positive mind, but sometimes unnecessary.
absolutely. I also think another element of this is that I made a lot of choices because I held myself back sometimes, where sometimes I'd get offered a leadership or a management position and I wouldn't take it because I didn't think I was ready for it. That wasn't all bad because it goes back to really being prepared for something I took on,
Mhm.
but I also wouldn't say, and I felt it was the right choice. But I also think it's important to think about, hey, maybe this is something I want, but it needs a little bit of self-work. So where I'm going is, as much as I believe in like, don't pressure yourself to change, be yourself, draw on your strengths. You have to think a little bit longer term and think maybe working on this weakness will enable me to get to where I want. So, so much as I believe in a strengths-based approach and being aware and, how of this, a bit of balance with work and your weakness is good. So always ask, okay, I have all the self-awareness, and I don't think I want to do this based on what I know, but think a little bit ahead and say, hey, if I just spent some time working on this one, weakness I have in myself, would it help me long term? So,
People will say, I can't do it because I'm not perfectly prepared. There are people who are labeling themselves with I'm perfectionist. And I wonder what is your position for this, because for me personally, when I hear people I am perfectionist, I'm alerted by that label.
yeah.
And yes, with your profession, and especially right now, positive psychology coach, how do you perceive when someone says I'm perfectionist?
It always triggers images of, and this is based on some my what I do as well, of something needing to be flawless before you unleash it to the world, because a lot of it is just worry about how it's going to be perceived or your own very high standards, your own inner critic. What I would say is don't let go of it completely,
Mm-hmm.
because in small doses, its perfectionism is actually your friend, because it will spur you. It's a motivator, right, to produce good quality work and for excellence, but only in small doses. So embrace it as an ally as much as it helps you. But the minute it starts like holding you up or you feel this heaviness or this paralysis, let it go and say, this is good enough, right? So,
I used to say perfectionism limits potential. It's just now came to my mind. It's like a synonym, no, antonym to courage. Drop it, that image of perfectionist, and just have courage to make that step. Take this step.
Yeah. Yes. Absolutely.
How
Yeah.
do you, I love the word courage, and it's amazing that actually the book has title courage because it's so multidimensional word. It can be for courage to get up from bed, courage to stay kind, courage to be aligned with your own values, courage to be yourself. That's something. Courage to be yourself. It's so difficult these times to be yourself. You stayed yourself. You stayed very strongly, solid within your own values. But also, you have mentioned in your chapter that at certain point in your career, you get attention from your leaders that gave you extra strength to continue the way you have chosen to be, how you are as a leader, as a executive director in this difficult industry. What was the role of your leaders that have embraced in you this will to grow, the courage to be as you are?
Yeah. I have had some excellent leaders that I owe a lot to. Um, the ones who sensed that I knew my stuff and I could execute and I could produce outcomes, but I was also someone who needed a supported platform. So, for instance, if I was in presenting to executives and I stumbled, I wasn't, I mean, I still am not great at like recovering on the fly and, coming up with some story. But if I had a manager who would be there with me and have my back, that would give me the courage. And in return for that, maybe relatively small investment on their part of just supporting me where I needed it, they got everything else that I was prepared to put in, all of the work, all of the thinking, all of the dedication.
Mm.
So, but without that support, and I've talked about this earlier, in a more fear-driven environment, a lot of it came out. I was still a hard worker, but a lot of my expression didn't. So I think those leaders who just sensed what I needed, which was a little bit of a safety net and their
Yes.
support, brought out the best in me. And I owe a lot to them for that.
That's the beauty and one of the principles of leadership, right? And you mentioned that at the beginning as well, that the leaders should follow this intention of bring up the best out of employees that they are standing in front of them, not take care only to strengthen own title or image at the table, but focus on people growth. Then I must say you are very lucky. You were very lucky to have that attention because many people do not have it, unfortunately. And anyway, as a leader to leader, most probably you are aware on all the reports around the satisfaction, engagement. Employees are really suffering. And even recently, I was seeing kind of reportage that 70% of people, they hate their jobs. They hate their jobs. And immediately came to my mind the Maslow pyramid. It's like
Yeah.
how sad it is with this knowledge, with these opportunities we do have within the organizational construct. People are going back to the very basics. I need to do that job to pay my bills.
Yeah, it is extremely sad because we spend so much of time in the workplace. And the things we've talked about, right? Like respect, support, you almost feel like they're not hard. And when you're talking, when, say, we're operating in a small group of friends or even in a small group of peers in the workplace, it's not hard, but it seems hard to scale it out to bigger organizations or bigger teams or, bigger agendas. And I don't know why that is. I think a lot of maybe other baggage gets in the way. You know, yeah.
From the perspective of attention, you said your leaders gave you a huge strength and added value to your growth. Taking that to the personal life, purpose and the value of building the networks with whom we are associating, how also we can measure the attention we have in our personal life.
Yeah.
Quite a lot of people are not willing to give the attention when you come and you struggle, and women are having that. We will talk about dramas, but not in the mature way for growth, that it can give woman to woman a wind into the wings.
I mean, this is a little bit flippant, but a little bit of coach training would benefit all of us, I think. Because coaching is so much about holding space for the other person, right? And being a container. Um, and I felt through this journey that even if I don't even build up a business out of it, the growth and the attention that it's enabled me to give those around me, it
Mhm.
would have been like a goal in itself, an end goal in itself, right?
But do you think we should pay attention on the quality of time we spend with people in personal life? What quality, what value we are getting? I don't want to bring it into transactional aspect,
Yeah.
but time is value, no doubt about that. And shouldn't we be more aware how we spend our time and with whom we spend our time?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is one of those things that gets easier as we get older and we have more confidence just to walk away from things that aren't serving us. Me being an introvert, I've always kind of been that way. As I said, I didn't really even try to build like huge circles. I always spent time with a few people that I enjoyed spending time with. But when I see young people these days, right, there is a big focus on, yeah, their worth seems to be measured sometimes by how big of a circle they have. And um, and I don't think they're really evaluating is what they're getting out of it, whether it's on a personal level or maybe later in life and at a professional level. So I think, yes, we do need to be intentional about putting our energy into what serves us. And while that may sound a little self-serving, I think if we are fulfilled by our interactions, it will, I think, ripple out into how we contribute and we show up to the world.
We will not do it because we are afraid of losing the friends. Should
Yeah.
we be afraid?
Yeah, no, I think we need to develop the maybe again using courage, sort of the courage to walk away. And it goes back to some of what you were saying about how we're conditioned and, the people-pleasing aspects. Um,
Mhm.
the conditioning to just be, I think, harmonize, right? So it's very hard to walk away from a friendship that's not serving you. And I will again say that I see this more in girls or women. I think when I see teenage boys, they're they congregate more around sometimes shared interests. Maybe they're all into, football or something. And
Mhm.
there's more transactionality, if that's even a word, built into their relationships, but not necessarily in an unhealthy way.
Mm-hmm.
So, so I think maybe bringing a little bit of that into female friendships would enable some healthy boundary setting.
Do
Oh.
you agree that we as a woman, we are more emotionally driven than rational?
I don't know that it's an either or.
Okay.
One quote that I heard in a positive psychology class is, emotions are just data. They're trying to tell you something. It's a little bit like when people say they're intuitive or they have a gut feel. It's not coming out of nowhere. It's your brain processing all of the information that you have built up over the years, which is coming out as like an intuition or a gut feel. So I don't think being emotional and being rational are mutually exclusive. Your emotions are information that you need to take into account to make
Mm-hmm.
decisions.
Are we accountable for the way how we manage our emotions?
We are. I would say we are. Um, I think again, I talked about the golden mean for strengths, underuse, a healthy expression, and overuse, and I think the same holds for emotion. Emotions like anger have their place, but you can channel anger constructively, right? Into
Mm-hmm.
maybe doing something about something you're angry about, but in a constructive way. Emotions like grief, don't try to suppress it. Um, just figure out, healthy ways to maybe to express it and channel it. It's easier done than said, but I think it goes back to the same principle of figuring out how to express it in a way that's healthy for you
It's
and
very
not destructive for
interesting.
those around you.
You know what,
Yeah.
like you said, you were listing in negative emotions. And it's very interesting. It just came to my mind that when we are observing in us the positive emotions, they are appearing only for a very short moment. When there are negative ones, we are praising them in us for as long as we have tears in our eyes. And that's
Yeah.
very interesting that we give more energy to the negative emotions rather than to positive one. Where do you think it comes from?
I think we are wired with a negativity bias. That's some of what I've been learning in my class. And I think again, an interesting quote I heard from one of my instructors was that, emotions really only last a few seconds. They're fleeting. The
Mm-hmm.
rest of it is a story you're telling yourself. So it's like the narrative that makes us hold on to them. Um, and it's also interesting you brought up positive emotions because maybe those emotions have to be managed as well. You don't think of things like managing joy or managing happiness, but maybe it's something I'm going to go off and think about. Are there, like ideals even for those, like the things I talked about, expressing it constructively and, in ways that are healthy for you? Is it even true of what we think of as positive emotions? Mm.
Bigger transition that I want to ask you. There will be emotions, and emotions will be our drive for decision making as well. How we are perceiving our surrounding environment. We tend to think having a corporate life is sustainability, long-term sustainability, having position, safe salary, and so on. Where did you find a courage in you to step back from that luxury, I will say, and serve people from completely different direction with somehow different value, like positive psychology? It's a huge shift and requires really braveness. How did you find the courage to make that choice?
It was not easy at all. Um, I think, I mean, I did wait. to get to a point where we were as a family somewhat financially secure. But I went from waking up pretty much having almost every hour of the day somehow structured for me to like nothing. And and I'm still working through that transition, but I think what helped me was that I felt like I had more to contribute to the world than, the next software release, of which I've done like a few hundred at this point, or the next
Mhm.
deadline. So so it's maybe the beautiful thing about hitting your 50s is that you really feel like you have more to contribute. And I was still in good health, and I was in a space where I could do that. Um, I think from a very practical perspective for anyone thinking of this, I would say line up two or three things that you have so that you're not left with
Mhm.
an emptiness when you do it. For me, it was some volunteer opportunities around mentoring college students and around, some workplace coaching. And then I took up this positive psychology credential. Um, I think having a willingness to just say, I'm exploring and then following the thread where it leads is helpful to have. Maybe not have as much of a goal-oriented mindset, right? But just say, I'm going to follow this path, like this collaboration book or this interview, and keep following where it leads you. All of those mindsets are helpful, but I think it keeps coming back to saying, okay, what's my purpose now? Is it really to sit down and do like 100 tasks? Or do I have more to give back to the world, right?
Mhm.
In whatever form, through coaching, through volunteering, through, some other thing.
Do you
Yeah.
think it's like when I listen to you, it resonates with me quite a lot. And it brings me to one thing, to have purpose in life. Do you think it's important on the journey for being content in life to have the
Yes.
purpose?
Yes. I think we should have purpose. Um, I think just as we talked about, not pressuring kids in their teens or early 20s to have a passion, I've also found it important to not pressure myself to have this is my next grand purpose for the next 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Instead, I think what's working for me is almost to have some little micro purposes. Say for the next 6 months, this is what I'm going to be doing, right? Um, Pursuing this coaching credentials, one of them. I enjoy creating content, so I've signed up to volunteer to do a newsletter for a group that coaches people through grief. So it's combining some of my interests. But through it all, if you don't have a purpose, even for the next 3 or 6 months, I fear I'm going to spend 10 hours a day, watching Netflix or something. So yes, have a purpose, but it doesn't have to be a grand vision of solving world hunger or, something
Absolutely.
for the next 10 years. Find a purpose that will steer you for 6 months and then
It
see where
can
it goes.
exactly. It shouldn't be like the big one. Okay, we are talking about from the perspectives of business owners, right? And that we left our comfy environment and we jumped on the very deep waters. And no, it's even not about that because uh, it's just wherever you are, you don't have to have expensive purposes, but just creating a value on a daily basis for your own life. It's making the change. It's growing your knowledge for being boldness when it's necessary to use it.
Yep.
What would be the message you would like to give?
I'd like to give a message to first have the courage to embrace who you are and have the courage to lean out of the system sometimes. There's so much messaging around leaning in and molding yourself. Just think, what would it look like if I leaned out? Is it really me that needs to change or the structure? But first and foremost, just stay true to who you are. You have everything that you need inside you. You have the power inside.
Beautiful. Thank you very much, Shobana. You have it in you. Have the courage to be happy. Thank you.
Thank you, Magdalena. It was my pleasure.